It's time for Supply Chain Now. Broadcasting live from the supply chain capital of the country, Atlanta, Georgia. Heard around the world, Supply Chain Now spotlights the best in all things supply chain. The people, the technologies, the best practices, and the critical issues of the day. And now, here are your hosts.
Hey, good morning. Scott Luton and Greg White with you here on Supply Chain Now. Welcome to today's show. Good morning, Greg. How you doing?
I'm doing really well. I've got stories to tell. We've got stories to hear. I'm really looking forward to this one.
You know, as you alluded to, I wish we were recording the pre-show warm-up conversation because it's been chock full. Our listeners are in for a wonderful conversation. And
no doubt. On
this episode, we're continuing our full access series where we spotlight female lead executives across industry, especially supply chain, that can have so much to offer. So leaders that will be inspiring, motivating, and energizing our audience for sure. So stay tuned for a wonderful story. All powered, of course, by our friends at Capgemini, a global leader in consulting, technology, services, and digital transformation. If you've heard that word once or a million times here lately, right, Greg?
Yeah, no doubt. And special thanks to Cindy Lago, VP of Supply Chain Practice at CAP, who really put this together with us. So
agreed.
Big thanks to her. And she's a great leadership example as well.
Absolutely. Quick programming note for our listeners. Hey, if you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to find us wherever you get your podcast from. Subscribe for free so you don't miss conversations just like this. All right, there's no further ado. Really excited about this conversation. We'll bring in our featured guest here, Stephanie Stuckey, CEO at Stuckeys Corporation. Stephanie, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Great to have you. Yeah.
Really enjoyed the warm-up, and I've got 12 pages of notes based on what you shared there. I think you're an inspiration. I'm really looking forward to sharing your experiences and perspective and POV with our audience. So appreciate the time today. So before we get to the heavy lifting, right, and so much there, let's get to know Stephanie a little bit better. So tell us, where'd you grow up, and give us an anecdote or two about your upbringing.
So I am originally from Eastman, Georgia, which is in the middle of the state. When I was a year old, my dad got elected to Congress, and we moved to DC. So I actually had a really fun childhood because it was almost like city mouse, country mouse. I went to school in Washington, D.C., but we spent all of our vacations every summer in middle Georgia, and very different worlds. And we were always campaigning for re-election, so I grew up in a very political environment. Story about my childhood. Okay, I'm going to tell one that my dad just shared at the Thanksgiving table for some reason. I remember this. I guess this is when I knew I wasn't afraid of being in public and speaking in front of people. My dad had a weekly TV show when he was in Congress, and it was the holidays, it was this time of year. And my mom, he had 3 kids with my mom and 2 kids from a previous marriage. And so there were like 5 kids in the house. My mom was going crazy, and she said, take one of them. And I was always the one who would volunteer to go. So he took me. And he was taping the show, and I was supposed to stay behind the scenes. And in the middle of the show, I walked out front and center and started singing Christmas carols. During his congressional show, he had a guest on, like the secretary of the something or other, and they were having a political conversation. And finally, they just gave up and let me sing. And he said it was his highest reviewed, most watched show of the year. So
wow.
Just wanted a little something different, Dad. Sometimes you need to give them a Christmas carol.
How old were you then?
I was, and we have the tape. So just looking at the picture, I think I'm about 6, 7.
Is that one of those shows?
Pardon?
Is that one of those shows that was on at like 5:30 on Sunday morning or something like that?
Oh no, this was prime time. Now keep in mind, this is the market this was aired in Macon, Georgia. So
okay,
this was not in the 1970s. So there wasn't a lot of cable competition like there is today.
Right.
Back in the day, you would have maybe 3 channels and then your local station. So
right.
people were looking for content. It was a primetime show. It got, people watched it.
That's incredible.
And there's an audience for everything, for sure. And
Well, especially that, right? I mean, how many people, can't you imagine how many people were going, hey, Myrtle.
Yeah, it was just
Look
different.
at this kid singing Christmas carols.
So let me ask you a follow-up question, because you're obviously at 6 years old, you're already into music, and that love for music continued through later in your journey, especially in Athens. Can you tell us a little bit about, your love for music in Athens?
Yeah, so this was our pre-conversation, which was a lot of fun. Had nothing to do with supply chain management, but I'm sure your listeners appreciate good music. And I went to the University of Georgia, go Dogs. I'm a double dog, undergrad and law school, and was there when REM was in its peak. And when, I've always thought Murmur was one of my favorite albums. Life's Rich Pageant's another one. I used to go to Weaver D's. And so I'm a huge REM fan. And so just the day they broke up, we were talking about that. I had to pull over. I was crying so hard when Night Swimming came on the radio. Still listen to their music. So
to our listeners, if you're not familiar with the band, the rock and roll global iconic band REM, roots are in Athens, Georgia. And I think all three of us are big fans here. And a little known factoid, Stephanie, I'll see if I can trip you up here. So one of the albums that was a great seller for the band was Automatic for the People. And do you know where they got that tagline from?
From Weaver D's.
Yes.
Food.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, that's why I love Weaver D's. And it's really good food.
Incredible. And Athens has got such a rich history for culinary or music, or of course higher education, even a lot of corporations and some leadership walks through the Iron Gate there at UGA. But love that story. Appreciate you sharing. I think music's one of those universal things that cuts through all the historic challenges that we're all experiencing here in 2020, which is a beautiful thing.
Agree.
All right, so moving from music to mentorship. So Stephanie, all of us can use a great mentor or advocate as we wind our way through our journey. And we're going to touch on your professional journey here in a minute, but in your formative years, what's one key mentor or advocate that you really benefit from?
Oh, formative years. I was actually thinking more recent. Can I give a more recent mentor? Yeah, I think so often in interviews people say their parents, which yes, of course, my parents were a huge influence on me, but as far as who has really helped mentor and guide me in my career path now, I wanted to give a shout out to Michael Coles, who founded the Great American Cookie Company and started from nothing. He and his partner made a very modest investment, a couple of $1,000 each, and built the largest chain of cookies in America. They sold it, and then he went on to be CEO of Caribou Coffee, helped completely turn around that brand. And now he founded the Kennesaw Business College. Kennesaw College is named for him, and he and his wife are very philanthropic. His wife's awesome too, Donna, and he's written a book. And I've reached out to him. I knew him through politics because I used to be a state representative, and he ran for office a couple times. A real shame that he was never elected. He would have been an amazing public servant, but public service comes in many forms, and he does do a real public service by mentoring, advising many people, especially through business college. So when I took over Stuckeys a year ago, I reached out to him, hadn't talked to him in years, and he's been someone I've reached out to regularly. Every other month or so, we'll have a session. He'll give me some thoughts. And he said some things that were so basic that I can't believe I wasn't focusing on it. But I think sometimes if you are running a business, starting a business, even though Stuckeys has been around since 1937, I joke we're an 80-plus-year-old startup because I'm reviving the brand and I'm starting it back up again. So you get overwhelmed and you wear a lot of hats. We don't have a huge corporate team at Stuckeys. The entire corporate team is 10 people, including me. So we're small but mighty, is what I like to say, and nimble. You always hear people say, well, we're small but nimble, and we are. It's an asset. So I was running in a lot of different directions. Michael helps sort of narrow in and say, focus. And he said, Stephanie, I really want you to look historically the past few years and currently where are you getting your revenue? What's driving profit in this company? That's how you're going to figure it out. So I pulled all of our financial reports. I did a spreadsheet. I put our profit centers into different buckets. And it dawned on me once I started putting everything together, 70% of our revenue came from sales of our product. And I had been focused on our retail locations and thinking franchise fees were where I needed to focus. It's not. That's not where the money came from. And then I looked historically at how my grandfather had run the company, and he made his money through sale of product. So that sometimes it's the real basic stuff that should be totally obvious, but when you're enmeshed in the day-to-day running of a company, or dealing with supply chain, and you're putting out fires, taking that step back and thinking, what is really what we do best? And then you got to hunker down on that. So I've shifted my perspective. I've focused a lot more on a product line. And then I've gotten down, then you narrow it down more. I've gotten into the SKUs. What's the best selling SKU? Where do we have the highest profit margin? So push more of that. And that's the pecan log roll and our candies. So, you know,
you're talking our language.
That is a common, go ahead, Scott.
You're talking our language in supply chain. And we had a hankering that's where it's going to go. But let's, Greg, before we dive more into Stuckeys and more into some of the really cool things that you and your small and mighty team are leading, Stephanie, let's walk a little bit further down that professional journey, right, Greg?
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like you announced a little bit of what you did. I'm so happy for you that you got out of politics. But aside from getting a law degree and getting into politics, what else did you do before you came back to the company?
I wore a lot of hats. I had several careers, and I'm a big advocate of taking the skill sets you learn from your different careers and bringing that knowledge into your next career. You don't check at the door everything that came before, and there is relevance, and there, even though it's an interesting career trajectory, I wouldn't change a thing, because there were valuable lessons gained throughout. So after law school, I practiced law for almost a decade doing criminal defense work. So hopefully you'll never need a criminal defense attorney, but I have done everything from pretrial hearings to murder trials to direct appeals, habeas corpus appeals. I worked in the state prison system for a couple of years.
Wow.
I was a public defender, and I represented everything.
Where did you do that, Stephanie?
Fulton County, and also I worked for the University of Georgia School of Law, had a legal clinic that represented inmates. That was my first job. So I could stay in Athens, frankly, and it was great learning.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think one of the best ways to learn how to try a case is to do appeals. So I started my legal career managing appeals, and when you're reading transcripts, and I'd have murder trials where the transcripts were stacked as high as my height, and reading through all that and figuring out what went wrong at trial, like that informs you in being a better trial attorney. And then I had to learn how to try a case and stand in front of people and present an argument, even if it's a tough case. I had some really hard cases.
That's really interesting. So you basically reverse engineered a case to learn how to try a case.
Yeah.
You also reverse engineered your product line and you know, your company mantra, if you will, to figure out how to reconstruct the company. So that's a really interesting gift. I mean, I wonder, it feels like one of those led to the other, right? Like
Absolutely. Yeah. And the first thing I did when I took over Stuckeys, I'm fast forwarding a little bit, but I inherited, so one thing I did inherit, I bought the company, but I got my grandfather's papers. There were about 6 boxes of material that had not been touched since his death in 1977. It had just been in storage. And my mother gave it to me. And I read probably 100 articles about my grandfather, interviews with him. There was a book written. It was just a private published book, but wealth of knowledge. I read the book 3 times. I took reams of notes. I condensed it into 3 pages of learnings with bullet points and put it in categories. And it really, how the company had been run, helped inform how I should run the company. So absolutely, those are great life skills. But I got frustrated with being a public defender because our budget kept being cut by the Georgia legislature. And I thought they just need some representatives at the legislature who understand the criminal justice process, that have actually been in the trenches and tried these cases and served as a public defender. At the time, there weren't any public defenders in the legislature. There's been a few that have come in and out over the years, but I ran for office really wanting to be more involved in the criminal justice system. And I got elected. It was a tough race. It was an open seat, but I ran against a woman who was much more experienced than I am, but I worked really hard. I knocked on 2,000 doors.
Wow.
That's how I won the race. And I had a good strategy, and I had a good consultant, and I listened to him. And he said, don't go to all these neighborhood gatherings. Like, you need to do the round of them once, but like, you don't need to go to every single meeting, because the same people show up at these meetings, and they're not all targeted voters in your district. And when it comes down to it, the only people who really matter to get you elected to office are the people who live in your district and who vote regularly. Super voters.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a spreadsheet. Back in the day, I didn't have an app to know where to go, but I had a spreadsheet, I had a walk list, and it was like, these are the super voters. And I knocked on every super voter's door. If they weren't home, I left them a handwritten note, and I came back later. And then I called them, and then I mailed them postcards, and then I put flyers on their door. And that's how you win an election at the local level.
So I have a really
Local
quick question.
politics is the best. You can actually meet the voters.
Right.
You can meet enough voters to win a local election.
That's really interesting. I had a buddy out of college who ran for office in my great-grandfather's neighborhood, and it was all about meeting. It was all about meeting the voters.
Yeah.
So you're a street
first thing
fighter.
I did when I took over Stuckeys was I got in my car and I went to all the stores and I met people. I did my listening tour, which is what you do in politics. You do your listening tour. You listen to everyone, and that informs your strategy. I had a strategy. I revised it a lot after I talked to people.
So you've mentioned spreadsheets twice. I have to ask this, since you're a CEO. Did you actually construct and manipulate and enter information into the spreadsheets, or did you? No way.
Yeah, but people showed me it. I have other people I've never been good at creating spreadsheets.
Sure.
I've had to learn the basics just to be functional, but if somebody creates a spreadsheet for me, I can populate it. And so my political consultant did the spreadsheet for me. I learned one of the best pieces of advice I got in politics is make sure your contract with your consultant gives you access to keep your data. When the election is over, you own your data, because some of those clauses, the consultant keeps the data. So that's really good advice no matter what you do in business.
Right.
Like, you are working with someone who is dealing with data, you make sure you've got access to your data. You get to keep that when the relationship may not work. Fortunately, I found that out with my political consultant.
We found that out big time. I mean, what is the product of the day these days? It is the data, right?
Yeah.
So that's great advice. Look, clearly you've gotten a lot of advice. You've done a lot of street fighting.
Yeah.
You clearly are an excellent learner, student. Student's probably a better word. Some people have a way with words and some people not have way. Anyway, so tell us, so you've had a lot of really impactful moments, but is there one or a few just kind of epiphanal, eureka, aha moments that just stand out to you as you've gone through your journey?
There's one I remember when I was in high school, when I was applying for colleges, and you're trying to figure out, well, what am I going to do with my life? And pick a college that has that offering that specializes in that subject matter. And I was really debating, and I'd grown up around politics. I went to high school in Washington, D.C. with kids of mostly congressmen at that time, and kids of diplomats and people in the military at the Pentagon. So I was very much in this highly charged political world. And I thought, I want to grow up and be like my mother, who is wonderful and I so respect, and I'm going to be a politician's wife. I'm going to be a great politician's wife. And then I thought, well, what if my husband loses the election? And what if he doesn't run a good campaign? And what if I don't like what he stands for? And then I'm like, I should be the one running for office. I just remember very distinctly thinking through this whole process and going, that should be me. I should be the one. And then if it doesn't work out with a husband for whatever myriad of reasons, then I will be the one in charge of my destiny. So that was an epiphany.
That is,
yeah,
that's quite an awakening.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess another epiphany was in college. I started out at Vanderbilt University and transferred to Georgia because there was this band called REM that I was really into. And it wasn't just REM, but I loved Athens, Georgia, and went for summer school and didn't leave. But while I was at Vanderbilt, I was active in the Young Democrats, and we had our congressman come and speak to us. Our entire Young Democrats, Vanderbilt's a pretty conservative campus. It was like 8 of us. And so when our congressman came, there were literally 8 of us. And he showed up and there was just like almost nobody in the room. And instead of just giving a 2-minute speech and leaving, he said, well, let's sit around a table and just have a conversation. That congressman was Al Gore. And
wow.
He talked about the environment, and that was an epiphany. And I realized that I was really passionate about the environment. So fast forward, when I was running for office, listening to my constituents, they cared about criminal justice reform. That was something I worked on, but they were really, really passionate about the environment. I had been engaged in environmental issues as a result of that talk with Al Gore. And so that really became my driving issue when I got elected to office. I worked on environmental issues. When I left politics, I headed up an environmental law firm, and then I became head of sustainability for the city of Atlanta. So that was like my career trajectory when I had the opportunity to buy my family's business.
Wow.
And there's
that's a big switch because you went
with the sustainability. I worked a lot of those issues.
Agreed.
Yeah, that was a big switch because you went to advocate for criminal justice, right? And did you get to do any of that?
Yeah.
Obviously.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I was on the Judiciary Committee. I chaired or served on a variety of committees related to juvenile justice reform. We helped rewrite the Juvenile Justice Code. I practiced juvenile law for a while as a result of getting more involved in juvenile issues. Worked very closely with Stacey Abrams. We served on the Judiciary Committee together, who's now, gosh, she may be Attorney General, so that's pretty cool.
Right.
And really got engaged in eyewitness ID reform. Number one cause of wrongful incarcerations and wrongful convictions is faulty eyewitness IDs, and worked on those processes on how to improve how you have witnesses with lineups. And so anyway, worked a lot on that.
A wealth of experience across a wide number of initiatives, which, to your point, so many organizations can benefit from those holistic experiences, those diverse walks of life and different roles, different functions, serving different aspects of our not only our society, but our business community. Oftentimes that can be underserved. So I appreciate how all that molded you as a leader into who you are now.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk more about your role here in a minute, what you do and where you're headed. But let's, for the 3 people that may be unfamiliar across our listening base of Stuckeys, let's level set a bit. So tell us what the company does. And then also, if you could, in a very small nutshell, folks have already kind of picked up on the family, the family roots, across generations. But if you can also give a micro history in a nutshell of the company.
Yes, Stuckeys has been a roadside oasis since 1937. We were founded by my grandfather as a pecan stand in Eastman, Georgia. and he sold treats to motorists heading down to Florida for vacation. And as people started to stop, he realized he was onto something. He went from the pecans to making a full line of Southern confections, most notably the pecan log roll, my grandmother's recipes. She made a lot of divinity and pralines and fudge. And then he started selling souvenirs, gas, offered clean restrooms, and realized he was onto something. His business did really well. Then World War II hit. He had to pivot, completely change how he did business. And he started supplying candy to the troops because sugar was rationed. He couldn't get access to sugar unless he made candy for the troops. Was one of the ways you could get his essential ingredient, which also helped war effort. And he built a candy plant and he was making the candy on site at each individual store. And so suddenly he was getting into supply chain management, and it turned out to be a real positive for his business as a result of making candy for the troops. He had to learn how to package his product, which had just been served fresh. He didn't have to deal with any sort of shelf life or anything like that. And then suddenly he was having to package and ship and get the product to the war effort. And when the war ended, all those GIs came home. There was post-war prosperity. My grandfather benefited from the post-war construction boom. He started building stores, and fast forward at our peak in the mid 60s to mid 70s, we had 368 stores in almost 40 states. We had a candy plant. We had a lot of his supply chain was he started supplying his own product. So he not only made his own candy, he had a billboard company, and he had a trucking company and a distribution center, all based in Eastman, Georgia.
Integration, man.
Yes, really smart. It was very vertically integrated. But then, so he made the product, distributed the product, marketed the product, and he franchised his stores. He didn't own and operate them, but he had the retail outlets that were part of his brand that sold the product. So it was vertically integrated, really smart business model, but he was unable to continue to grow. He didn't have the capital or the management to continue at that rapid growth. He sold the company. Long story short, the company that bought Stuckeys got bought out in a hostile takeover by a railroad conglomerate, and the oil embargo hit in the 1970s, so external factors really hurt us. People weren't traveling on the highway as much. Airline Deregulation Act passed, so airfare was cheaper. People were flying more, and the stores plummeted. They fell out of family hands for decades. So that's kind
interstates too. I mean, if you think about where Stuckeys were, they were on the old U.S. highways a lot of times, right?
Yeah, so interstate highway system came in under Eisenhower. He passed the act in 1952. So from 52 to 58, rapid construction of the interstate highway system. And my grandfather was faced with the decision, does he shut down his stores or does he reestablish himself on the interstate? And he, obviously, history has shown he moved to the interstate, and he used it as an opportunity for growth and to grow back stronger, which is really the definition of resilience. You don't just adapt and get back to the way you were before. You adapt in a way that's better and stronger. And what he did was, his stores before had just been piecemeal. He would just build them with whatever design made sense. He might take over an existing building. When he had an opportunity to start from scratch, he came up with a building design that was unique, that was visible, that screamed Stuckeys, and many of you may recognize that sloped teal roof and the bright yellow signs with the red. This is an 80s incarnation behind me, the logo behind me, but the logo that he used in his heyday was a different logo, but which we have gone back to, by the way, in our rebranding. But he used that as an opportunity. He's like, all right, I'm going to make my stores really visible, and I'm going to use the highway system as a way to rebrand. And we really were the first roadside retail. We were there before Pilot or Love's or Truck Stops of America, Buc-ee's. We were there decades before any of the others that you see today.
I remember. My wife, just mentioning that this interview was going to happen, she said 1977, Phoenix to West Virginia, 6 stops at Stuckeys on the way. So
that was our heyday.
I love it.
Yeah.
And it was an experience, right? I bet she remembers, like, you could buy, this is a bit of an aside, but yesterday was Cyber Monday, and I was really fighting for getting some of our nostalgic products online. And ideally, I'd like to get them back in our stores. They're franchise owned, so you have to do some convincing with the franchisees. But I said, let's just throw stuff up online and see if it sells. And I missed some of those products that we sold back in the day that made a stop at Stuckeys an experience. And I had gone on Facebook. We don't have a lot of money for market research, but I did what I could. And I asked our Facebook followers, what Stuckeys products do you remember? And so I started selling some of those, and I got the dunking birds. If you remember that, went in the water. They're red, and they wear. It has a little top hat for some weird reason.
Yeah.
Hey,
so
birds like to be formal. You know, they like
people said the dunking birds. We want the dunking birds back. So I got dunking birds. We almost completely sold out of dunking birds yesterday. I had to order more dunking birds. So
I love that.
I really think that the nostalgia is going to be really important. Look, when people get out of their homes and really get traveling again, I think the comfort of that nostalgia is going to be big.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well,
and my challenge is to give it a modern, fresh approach, so people who don't know the brand, and I'm not delusional. I know there are decades of people who didn't grow up stopping at Stuckeys, and I need to reach out to them. But I also, this is what I learned in politics, you shore up your base.
Right.
You know, get your base out.
To your point, Greg, I mean, some of the big drivers behind the SKU rationalizations is, to your point exactly, where, you know, consumers are getting in and out of stores really quickly. So a lot of these companies are putting the most prominent, well-known, tried and true brands and focusing their efforts right there, because those micro instant decisions, and that will probably continue, to your point. The other thing that I want you to speak to, if you would, Stephanie, and then we'll pivot back kind of over to your role, is as you're walking us through the history, you kind of stop there, kind of at the golden era as your grandfather kind of wrapped up, and then it went through non-family hands. If you could pick back up on where you re-entered the picture, and then Greg, if you could take it from there, and we'll dive in deeper into the path forward.
Yeah, our story is interesting, and if any of the listeners have a similar experience, I would love to know it, or know of a company that has had a similar experience, because we were a family brand. This happens quite a lot. You see a nostalgic brand like Kentucky Fried Chicken or Holiday Inn, Dunkin' Donuts, it goes on and on. They have Wendy's, Dave Thomas. You have a visionary founder. They start a chain, it does well, consumers really relate to the brand, and then it gets sold to a large corporation, and frankly it loses some of the magic. That's what happened to us. Where our story diverges from that classic tale is that we actually got the company back. So I'd be really interested if there's any other stories out there like ours. I heard today that Schlotzsky's has a similar story, so I've got to research that.
Apple. I mean,
well,
if you think about it, Apple is a very similar story, right?
Came back.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, if I could be as profitable as Steve Jobs. Be
nicer, though, please, Stephanie. Clearly you are.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, right? Elon Musk is one I admire as far as what the company has done, but whoa, I hear he's hard to work for. But love the cars.
Yeah.
Love a lot of what he does, but I digress. So we got the company back, which is
awesome.
A small miracle.
So your dad, Billy.
My dad got the company back. I was in college, and the company that had bought it, a Chicago railroad conglomerate, they were losing money, and they were facing litigation from the franchisees who were unhappy with how they were managing, or frankly mismanaging, the company, and they just didn't want it. It was a liability. And so my father got the company back, and he was a very successful businessman. He still is. I don't mean to say it like past tense. He's very much alive, but he's retired. But he was head of Interstate Dairy Queen Corporation, a company he founded. He owned the franchise rights to every Dairy Queen store on the interstate highway system in the U.S. That's a company
Wow.
he founded. That was his business. That's what he really did. But he was also a bit of a serial entrepreneur. He had a timber company. He owned a local bank, still owns those. And Stuckeys was part of his portfolio. At that point, Stuckeys was doing so poorly that my father's strategy, which made sense at the time, was to co-brand with Dairy Queen. And so he was co-branding in the mid 80s before you really see that. And not like today, you'll pull over at a Pilot and you'll see a Subway and a Dunkin' and a variety of brands that are all under one roof. He was doing that well before then, not only with Dairy Queen, but with other roadside retail establishments. He would say, well, can we have 250 or 500 square feet of interior retail space? We'll put in a gondola or an end cap, and we'll brand some signage, and you pay us a franchise fee, and we stock the store with our branded products. And so that's how he ran the company, with the Stuckeys Express store within the store model. Fast forward 2012, my dad sells his Dairy Queen, and his partner sell Dairy Queen to Warren Buffett, who owns American Dairy Queen. So that made sense for his portfolio. Also a testament to how good my father was at running the company, because it attracted Berkshire
Warren
Hathaway.
Buffett.
Yeah. And my dad did not get to meet Warren Buffett. Darn, the Oracle of Omaha did not come to Eastman, Georgia, but his signature is on the paperwork.
Stephanie,
That'll do.
That'll do, right? Can I see it?
Quick aside here. So you mentioned the Oracle of Omaha. Little known fact that Greg is known as a wizard of Wichita. I don't know if you knew that or not, Stephanie.
There you go. Awesome.
Only by Scott. Only known that by Scott.
Well, already, and we're continuing down the path, but gosh.
Oh, and then I got the company.
Yes.
Last year.
Tell us about that, because
I got the company.
that's not just, we talked about this a little bit. That's not just a family story. That's a generational story. That's that's a gender transitional leadership story. I mean, tell us about that. So
last year, my dad's business partners came to me and asked me if I was interested in buying their shares, which amounted to 49% of the company. Since they had all pretty much retired in the early 2010s, the company had been run just by a skeleton crew, and really had not had a CEO, had not had a marketing plan or budget or strategy. It was somewhat in autopilot. And at that, when I was approached about the company, we had 67 locations, 20 of which were freestanding brick and mortar. The others are the store within a store concept, none of which are corporate owned. We have a distribution center that we operate, and we outsource our manufacturing right now. Currently, we don't make our own product. And we've been losing money since 2012. And I'm sorry, 2015. So on the balance sheets, did not look so good. I went to several financial advisors. Two of the three told me not to invest in the company. And then the third said I should do it because I'm buying something that's not on the balance sheets, which is a brand. So I did it, and I knew the brand. I knew my grandfather. I know what the brand is capable of. And I decided also, I went to my father and I said, well, if I'm acquiring 49% and there's not a CEO, the company needs a CEO. I want to be a CEO. And he said, well, you've never even run a lemonade stand. What makes you think you can run Stuckeys? And I said, well, I don't think I can run a lemonade stand, but I think I can run Stuckeys. And I know the brand. So I did. And like I said, I embarked on this tour of visiting all the stores. Fortunately, we have a good team in place, small but mighty. Within 6 months, I thought it really made sense to own the entire company. So without going too much into the detail, but it was very amicable. And went to my father, I bought out his shares. A lot of that was in trust, so I had to deal with probate law and his trustee, and negotiated a fair deal for everyone, and owned the company outright. My father continues to advise me, talk to him almost every day. And then I got a business partner 6 months ago to help me run the company, and we jointly own the company now.
I love how
Awesome.
you mentioned a fair deal for everyone. You know, as Greg and I, we, you know, everyone negotiates through all the different journeys.
Yeah.
And I can speak for myself, big believer. You know, I don't need the absolute best deal out there. I want a good, fair deal for all parties where they're all equally motivated, incentivized, and it creates that goodwill and rapport that will only make the deal, only bring more value to the deal. And I kind of reading between what you shared there, it seems like that was part of the effort, is making sure all parties, shareholders, were taken care of.
Yeah, relationships really matter. And that's one of the reasons why I picked the business partner I did early on. Well, it's still early on. It's only been 6 months, but one of our first meetings, we do a monthly meeting where we go through all of our accounts payable and our accounts receivable. And frankly, we had some vendors that we had not paid in a while. And one of our team members said, well, they haven't asked for the money in a year, so we're just going to pay them when they get around to asking. And my partner said, no, we're not doing business that way. We're paying everyone. If we can't pay them the entire amount right now, we reach out and we get on a payment plan that's fair and reasonable. And that's what we've done. And you know what? You treat your vendors right, they're going to treat you right. And we learned that more than ever with COVID. Everyone's stretched thin throughout the supply chain. That's been our biggest challenge with meeting our Q4 sales targets, which we have so far. We just hit our November mark and it even exceeded it. But our biggest challenge has not been what I thought it would be, which would be our distribution center. Could our team at the warehouse manage the increase in sales? It's getting the product that we need to land in the warehouse so we can fulfill our orders and having sufficient inventory. You treat your vendors right, they're going to treat you right.
Yeah.
It's
It's funny, early in COVID, somebody, I can't even remember who said this, but they said, hey, it's too late to make friends now.
Yeah.
Right. And this was all, so I've studied this kind of thing forever. This was one of those aha epiphanal moments.
Yeah.
And at the same time, ironic, but Billy Graham, the Billy Graham organization, had the best vendor policy I've ever heard of. They paid all of their vendors 10 days early. And
oh my gosh, I love
whenever they needed anything, which is frequent, right? Whenever they needed anything from their vendors were always, yeah, of course, right? And that was just like your business partner. That was just part of their culture.
Yeah.
That was part of who they were as a company. So I'm interested, since you're in charge, and by the way, no small task, first of all, with the parental relationship thing, right? I mean, and him handing it over to his girl, I'm sure he looked at it somewhat that way, right?
My brothers definitely, had they expressed an interest, might have gotten the upper hand in that, but everyone was happy with me taking on the company. Phew.
Well, and you know, and one of the standout things, aside from the fair dealing that you did, is he had to be proud that somebody stepped up. Probably proud that the one he dragged around to all of his meetings did it, if he reflected on things. And he's fine, and he probably is going, finally that law degree is paying off.
Yeah, right.
That's exactly the way fathers think, I'm just going to tell you.
Yeah.
But
no,
so
but
tell
he's
us
very happy. He's very happy. I remember within 6 months we started turning a profit, and he sent me an email when I sent out the month. I sent him the financials. He still reads the financials, and he said, "Congratulations, you did something I haven't been able to do."
Wow.
Make a profit with Stuckeys, because
that's a big moment right there.
His profit center was always Dairy Queen.
Yeah, that's a big moment right there.
Yeah.
I hope you have that posted to your wall somewhere.
Yeah, right. I'm saving this email.
Right. I'm using it next Thanksgiving, Dad.
Yeah.
So you've had a lot of opportunity to impact not just the financials, but the culture of the company and the future of the company. So let's shift gears a little bit towards that, towards what does Stuckeys mean now, and what do you see as the future of the company?
So I'm really guided by how my grandfather ran things. He had a saying, every traveler is a friend. And what I like about that saying is it can apply to so many things. It doesn't just have to be road trippers. And it doesn't even have to be just forms of travel like air travel or traveling on a bike or whatever. We're all travelers through life.
Mm-hmm.
So I take that to mean treat everyone as a friend. That gets back to treat people with kindness and respect. The energy you give out is the energy you give back. One of my favorite quotes from Warren Buffett, which is what gave me the confidence to think that me, with my very diversified portfolio of experiences, that I could take on Stuckeys, was he said in a conversation once that's on YouTube, when he was looking to buy companies, what did he look at? And obviously he looks at the financials. He reads he's been reading financial reports since he was like 8 years old. That's when he started investing. The guy's like a wicked genius.
Yeah.
But he said he looks for emotional intelligence. He looks for leadership in companies that have emotional intelligence. So it's not just the financial acumen. It's being able to be mature and respectful and treating people kindly. So that is really the culture that I want to bring to the company. And I'll tell a story that I'm very proud of that really was not told in my grandfather's day for a lot of reasons. But we are based in the South, even though our stores were all over the country, we've always been centered geographically in the southern states. So during the civil rights time, or predating that, during the Jim Crow era, when so many establishments, retail, public, establishments that were open to the public were segregated, hotels and roadside establishments especially, Stuckeys was never segregated. We never had whites only. We were always open. And we were in the Green Book. Any of you who are familiar with the travel guide that was used by African Americans, because when we talk about the Great American Road Trip, I have to stop myself and start saying the road trip, because it wasn't the Great American Road Trip for many people, especially people of color, and they couldn't safely stop. And without that guide telling them where they could stop, they wouldn't be able to safely stop. And Stuckeys was in the Green Book. We're in the movie The Green Book, so go see it if you haven't. There's a scene at a Stuckeys, not a real Stuckeys, it was a set, but it's a great set. They did a really good job recreating what we looked like in our heyday. And I really value that we were always welcoming and open. So I like to take that with us today. And things really do come back. I've had so many African Americans of a certain age come up to me and thank me because they were able to stop. And
Wow.
And to this day, they're customers. So right. That's helping our business. And that's not why, well, maybe my grandfather did it in part. He used to say he was only biased against people who didn't have money. That was his only prejudice. You've got money, you can come to my store. So yeah, I will say part of it was probably financially motivated, but he was a good and kind person and treated people respectfully.
All right, so much there. I've got to dive in here, Stephanie. I love what you just shared all throughout the interview, but in the last 5 minutes in particular, 2 quick points. My wife and I watched The Green Book, and that is a wonderful movie. I think Viggo Mortensen is one of the lead characters. And the whole movie is great. So listeners, check that out. And then secondly, on a much more important note, what you speak to, which I think is really important for all of us to wrap our head around, is that, on social media, we always see these memes, especially around holidays, of a typical Americana scene from the 50s or 60s. And it's kids in plaid on sidewalks or bicycles or whatever the scene is. And a lot of folks comment, those are good old days. Well, to your point though, Stephanie, which is so important for all of us to understand, those weren't the good old days for so many people, a huge segment of our population. And to really tackle what we've got to tackle in this day moving forward, we've got to understand and embrace that context. Otherwise, we're never gonna gain ground on these critical issues. So I really appreciate you bringing that, and I appreciate that element of Stuckeys culture.
Yeah, and that's how I think some of these nostalgic brands need to be mindful of bringing our brand forward into a new generation. There are things that really matter, values, especially to past generations that just weren't as prevalent. Definitely race relations in the South, but really all over. Prejudice happens everywhere. Mm-hmm. So that's important to consumers, younger consumers now more than ever. And sustainability, which taps into my background. I think Stuckeys was sustainable before it was even a thing, just because that's how we ran our business. We grew pecans. We had a pecan orchard. It is a native nut, one of the few native nuts that is edible nuts that's native to the United States.
Right.
Cashew, pistachio, almonds, none of those are native to this country. So we are very sustainable. Our product is very sustainable. But
so Greg,
at the time,
I think
it was just economic necessity.
Yep. Greg, I think Stephanie's already shared from a cultural standpoint, I think some of the hallmarks, but maybe we pick back up on there in terms of what else is important to Stephanie as CEO from a cultural standpoint as it relates to Stuckeys. Is that a good point to pick back up on?
Yeah. I mean, I read your site, and I read I'll have to paraphrase it, but I read the quote from your grandfather about the company, and to paraphrase his message was, people say treat people, like your neighbors. But the truth is, as he said, with your neighbors, if you make a mistake in that relationship, you can go see them again tomorrow. When you're talking about a traveler, you're speaking with a traveler, that may be the only opportunity you have to influence them. So treat them right every single time without fail. And I think that's an important part of what made Stuckeys great. It's clearly what drove him as a person to be so open and accepting and fair and unprejudiced. And I think it's clear that has landed with you as well. But yeah, as you think about the culture and how the industry and the world has changed, and how the core of your business has changed, now a product, not a franchise company, though you do still have franchises, right?
We do. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about how you see the company moving into the future.
Yeah, it's just a matter of focus. Yeah. I do want to say one more thing about that customer, because that letter that is on our website, it is actually largely taken from my grandfather's letter. And I really value what he said. You just have one chance to make that good impression, especially in the retail world. Mm-hmm. That's a fleeting relationship unless you treat them right. And then it can really become a relationship. And I'm so encouraged by people who have stopped at our stores for decades. And even though the stores look a little bit like they need some TLC these days, they're still loyal customers because they were treated right. You know that saying, people don't remember what you say, they remember how you make them feel.
Right.
And that's what matters. The other thing I read recently that really makes sense is, often if you have an unhappy customer, they're going to tell like 20 people. A happy customer they're just happy, right? You do not want an unhappy customer. So it's not only making that impression so that they're going to stick with you and want to come back, but we all make mistakes. I have to say, when I look on, obviously I check out, I'm very aware of the competitive landscape, and I look at Google reviews, Yelp reviews, Amazon reviews for our competition. I am very suspect if someone that we're a competitor with has nothing but good reviews. That is just not authentic.
Right.
They're paying somebody, they're doing something they shouldn't be doing, because no company is without some faults, some moments. Not every customer is going to be a happy customer for whatever reason.
There's always an opportunity to improve. Always. It's a journey with no finish line. Every company, regardless of how sparkling their Wall Street history or their non-Wall Street history is, there's always room for improvement. So I agree with you. Great point there.
But the issue is how you deal with those complaints. You got to deal with complaints right when they happen.
Yep.
You got to address them. You got to change the system, the process. Was it just a one-off? Or is there something fundamentally wrong with how we do business? If you ignore that complaint, you could be ignoring something dealing with how you run your business.
Yep. Agreed.
That will only get worse.
That's the thing. You've got to acknowledge, right? You've got to acknowledge, not just for the customer's sake, but for your own sake, to let them know you care enough to listen, even if you might have a different point of view on it, but then also to internalize that somehow and create a mechanism to analyze and figure out, is this something we need to change, or is this that one-off that you still need to deal with diplomatically, right?
Yep. Great point. And going back to, speaking of your mentioning complaints there, I was reading a case study a month or two ago about a major candy manufacturer, global candy manufacturer, and they found that as they were categorizing the data, what they had considered to be the complaint bucket, when they dove deeper with a dedicated project team, about 30% of those were true complaints. The other were suggestions and ideas for products and all this stuff that they weren't even getting to because they had just miscategorized, misused the data. And that's a big fatal error these days. But before we go broader and get your take on kind of global business, global supply chain, there's a really big initiative. You've alluded to it a couple of times around pecans. We even talked about how to pronounce pecans prior in the pre-show. But you are making a big play and a big push to get more involved in the global pecan market. Is that right?
We are hoping to. There are a lot of external factors beyond our control. So that's the challenge when you're dealing with a commodity. There's so much that is just out of your control. So pecan is a interesting nut because, first of all, it takes 7 to 9 years for the tree to be at the stage where you can actually, the crop yields an edible nut. So there's a bit of a life cycle there where you have to be patient for the nut to really get to where you can eat it and sell it. And then the other challenge is pecans are known for having on years and off years. So Stuckeys was founded during a bumper crop year. We had a particularly good pecan crop the year Stuckeys was founded in 1937. So you have to deal with those challenges anytime you have an agricultural product. So
we are talking about nature here, aren't we? I mean, I think sometimes people forget that, right?
Well, and severe weather, I mean, that taps into my prior life dealing with climate issues. Hurricane Michael was devastating to Georgia's pecan market. Alabama's pecan market just took a real tough hit. So hurricanes are real. Rear pecans are grown in the southeast of the U.S. and Mexico. There's a lot of severe weather. There's a lot of hurricanes that impact the crops, so you have to deal with severe weather. And then we also have to deal with tariffs. And there's been a tariff war during the Trump administration. We'll see what happens with the Biden administration. And there was starting to be a slackening off of the tariffs in February, and then a global pandemic hits. Talk about a tsunami for supply chain. So suddenly the Far East, which has been a huge market for Southern pecans because it's considered a delicacy, the nut is a delicacy in Asian markets, we were suddenly cut off from that. There were a lot of Georgia crops that literally before the crop was even harvested, there had already gotten into a contract with foreign export market to sell the entire crop. Like none of it was being sold domestically. So how we kind of hedged our bets on that is my partner and I will soon be acquiring a pecan facility. It will be pecan processing and we will not manufacturing, but it's a manufacturing facility. We will take the nuts, we'll sort them, they'll clean them, and we can sell them in shell or shelled. And so we got that whole line of the market, but then we're also going to be a buyer. So we'll sell those pecans, but then we're also a buyer of pecans for our candy line. So we'll be making snacks and candies with the product. So it's kind of interesting. Like sometimes it's a buyer's market, sometimes it's a seller's market, but if you're sitting on both sides of that supply chain, one of you's going to benefit no matter what.
Right, you benefit either way.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, I've never been.
And if it's a bad tariff year, then we'll sell domestically. You know, if it's
options.
You just got to figure out how to diversify your portfolio enough that you're going to be able to weather those tough times.
You know, do you think you'll go all the way back to farming? I mean, will you own trees or?
We do.
Whatever you call them. You do now.
We do have orchards, and that's the beauty of the crop that we've invested in. We actually don't have a lot of pecans, but the pecan trees can last 200 years. So
wow.
It can be a sturdy tree.
Well, I know that after their useful crop life is over. They're highly sought after as building products because it's incredibly tough wood, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and they're beautiful. And then my business partner owns a lot more pecan orchards than Stuckeys does, but we still have the original pecan orchard that my grandfather sold pecans not just from our orchard but from all around the area. He bought pecans from local farmers. But it's great. It's a native tree. It really is America's nut, and that's a big part of how I want to move the company forward. If you go to the snack aisle, I can talk all day about pecans. You go to the snack aisle in your grocery store, convenience store, you're going to see peanuts and cashews, almonds, macadamia nuts, pistachios. Do you see pecans? If you're lucky, they might be in a mixed nut bag fighting for a little space. And even then, it's like that Brazilian nut. You might have one.
Yes, we got to change that. We got to change that.
We need to change that. It's America's nut and it's healthy.
Yes.
So watch out. We're about to enter snack nut market. And it's been that way. There's a reason it's been that way. I won't go too much in the history, but there's a federal marketing order that has benefited these other nuts that are grown in the U.S. The almond and the pistachio and the peanut. But the peanut is a legume, but I'll throw that one too.
Right.
They have federal marketing orders that have supported them because those growers got their act together in the 1950s and have had tens and hundreds of millions of dollars into marketing. Like got milk, is a federal marketing order. Pork, the other white meat, federal marketing order. The federal government has backed those programs along with the producers. So the pecan growers are scrappy and fight amongst themselves, and they're in 20 states, and they finally got their act together, and their federal marketing order passed 2 years ago. So,
Stephanie, I think you found your marketing phrase, America's nuts. And I think everyone could believe that right now.
Yeah.
Agreed. Go native. It's our native nut. None of the other nuts are from this country.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Very
Even peanuts.
A lot of passion.
I know peanuts aren't technically a nut, but
the peanut is an imposter on the nut aisle. I'm just saying.
Right.
All right.
Don't tell Jimmy Carter.
Let me
Having said I love peanuts. I love
peanuts. I could barely get a word in edgewise here. Lots of passion in this discussion. We're all around pecans, which we're all passionate about. But and if you ever spend any time in South Georgia, I've spent a lot of time from Albany, which I probably mispronounced, to Valdosta,
pretty close.
Columbus.
No, yeah, I think you pronounced it right.
Oh, good. That never happens. But the pecan orchards, groves, I guess, as it were, wonderful, beautiful part of the region, and I really love to hear all the different opportunities with that and other things that the Stuckeys team's up to. So we're gonna have to bring you back on maybe a year later, and we can see all the progress that you've made in this new reinvigorated, passionate leadership behind a well-known American brand that's entering a whole new phase and exciting chapter. So really excited about that, Stephanie. Hey, weigh in. You've touched a lot on sustainability. As we start to wind this interview down, clearly sustainability is a huge, massive, it's not an issue. It's a calling, especially in supply chain, especially in global supply chain, which are going to, you could, on one hand, it's some of the biggest violators, Greg, we've had that conversation before, but on the other hand, a lot of the real change that's tackling the opportunity that is sustainability, the calling that is sustainability, is being led by supply chain leadership. So if you would, as we wind this down, what's one or two really important aspects related to the sustainability movement that's important to you?
Well, and I'll touch upon making a positive out of a really tough time for our country and for the world, which is the pandemic. It has taught us that for procuring our products, the more close we can get to our manufacturing facilities, the better. If we can source domestically, because there have been so many challenges getting product from abroad, so many delays and shutdowns, the more we can work locally, the better. And that's sustainable as well. So we're fortunate in that our main product is domestically grown. 90% of the world's pecan production comes from this country. And since the 1950s, the majority of the number one pecan producing state in the country has been Georgia. We had a bit of a step back around Hurricane Michael, but we're number 2 now. We'll be number 1 again. All that's to say, it's a sustainable product. It's grown domestically. It's close to where we manufacture. So there's not a big carbon footprint to get it to our manufacturing facility. I think another thing that I'm really looking at, a couple, one is the closed loop system. Ideally, you're reusing as much of your product as possible. There's no waste. And the great thing about sustainability is not just the environment, it's also the economic aspect of it, and also the people aspect of it. So there's sort of 3 legs of the sustainability stool, so to speak. So it makes economic sense to have no waste. And so I'm already strategizing about what we can do with our waste in our manufacturing process, most notably the pecan shells. So you can sell them to a third party that will use them for some, to produce energy and some biomass facilities. But I'm also looking at maybe using the pecan shells for more productive economic commercial uses, like using the chips in barbecue. That's a thing. So
huge thing. Yes. I love that.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think creative. Right now, we don't make a lot of money out of selling it for use in energy production facilities. So I'm already thinking, and also it's not really brand forward. So how can we also promote the brand? What can we do with the pecan shells? Maybe you can crush up the pecan shells and use them as wood particle or something. I'm still learning that, but that's a critical piece, is no waste in the process. And then packaging is something that is just evolving. But there's a lot of waste in food packaging. You've got to have your product preserved, which makes it very difficult to have reusable, recyclable containers. And most of the pouches that we use for our pecan products are just not recyclable, but they do keep the product fresh.
Right.
So it's
clearly you're determined. It's an
environment versus economy trade-off on that one, right? And
well,
so,
it is on everyone, and at some point you can only do what you can do.
Yeah.
And and you've got to leave it to some extent to the consumer. As we talk about here a lot. Look, the supply chain exists because of consumers, and as you've rightly noted, the more local a supply chain is, the less waste, the less risk, the less time investment, the less capital investment, unless a consumer insists on pecans from out of season or tomatoes from out of season. It's really we who drive the waste in the supply chain, and ultimately we're responsible for its recycling as well. So, I think you can motivate your travelers to do the right thing with the packaging that you just absolutely have to use to make sure they get the quality product that they want from you. So I think maybe if you make it a joint effort, I really feel like that's where corporations really need to go. Is to help partner and collaborate with their consumers to close the loop, as you said.
Yes.
But it's consumer driven. You're absolutely right. That's why I'm so proud of the generation that's coming up. My kids are Gen Z, and they're millennials. They're not just wanting that, they're demanding that.
Yes.
And it's not just them as consumers. Now that they're entering the job market, they don't want to work for corporations that aren't manufacturing products that are sustainable and good for the environment.
Yeah.
So we're going to see change.
Take a page out of, we talked earlier, not too long ago, about Newell Brands and how they put their products into schools and get students to brainstorm on how they can make them greener products.
Right.
And if they are, if the idea is elevated and practical enough, they purchase the IP from the students. And it's really for the army of 300 designers, it's really brought a lot of new ideas and spins from, to your point, the consumers that are the younger generations that do expect sustainability to be built into those products. So that might be a great idea to explore. But regardless, I love the passion.
I love that.
I love the passion. I love that Greg, I leave this conversation knowing that stuff's going to get that GSD. Stephanie's all about GSD, getting stuff done and getting stuff done better and more sustainably. and taking again this long, well-recognized brand to new heights, and that's really exciting. But let's make sure, Stephanie, our listeners know how to connect with you and the Stuckeys brand. And I think you've got a little special offer for our listeners.
I got a giveaway. Right? Yeah. So we're on all the social media platforms, www.stuckeys.com. We're on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. Personally, you can follow me, and my journey is on all my social media handles. We're on Instagram too. My handle is Stuckey Stop. So you can follow me at Stuckey Stop, and LinkedIn is just Stephanie Stuckey. And giveaway, we will be giving a gift tin of Stuckeys pecan log rolls to one of your listeners. I'll provide the link. They do have to give their email address to be entered into the contest. You'll get our emails, but if you don't want them, just unsubscribe. We don't like to send stuff that's not wanted, but we also send good deals. So if you get our emails, you will also get our promotions. And we'll randomly select a lucky winner in 2 weeks. 2 weeks-ish, when I get around to it.
Right,
Between
it's the holidays,
December, so I will pick
3 weeks.
There will be a winner.
Yeah, there we go.
We're going to make it easy. So a lot of the information that Stephanie just shared is going to be on the show notes of this episode, including the link to register for the free drawing. I really wish you could send pecan logs via email attachments, because I'm craving several right now, Stephanie, but we'll satisfy that urge later on. And it looks like you're... I
said my cat was going to join at some point.
Yes.
She's been on the podcast.
And her name again?
Smokey
the cat. Yeah. I love it. All right.
Smokey, what is it you have to say today?
Yeah, I put her on Instagram sometimes, because whenever I put together the boxes, the corporate boxes, I come up with the design for them and the price points. And so when I'm putting the boxes together, she will sit in the box. And so there's pictures of her on Instagram sitting in our boxes.
Inspiration with that small and mighty team. Well, really big thanks, Stephanie. I really have enjoyed this wide-ranging conversation, but ton of passion. I love the story behind where you're headed is fascinating, and I think a lot of our listeners are going to agree and find it intriguing, and most importantly, perhaps, is find inspiration in your journey. And that's why, really, on behalf of our whole team here, really appreciate you carving some time out to share it with our Supply Chain Now audience. Stephanie Stuckey, CEO at Stuckeys Corporation, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right. So, Greg, outstanding conversation. I've got 12 pages of notes after pre-show. I think I've got about 37 now. But in particular, every traveler has a friend. That is such a, as Stephanie
is a friend. Every traveler is a friend.
Is a friend. Oh, yeah. Gosh. I even stopped.
It's your handwriting, Scott.
There you go. Every traveler is a friend. Yeah.
Every traveler is a friend. All right. So, but Greg, that's just one of the numerous things I took away from Stephanie's story. What's one most important thing from your perspective? And then we'll sign off.
Oh, Scott, good try. There's no way I could keep it to one, but I got to tell you, full access is all about women in leadership. But you know what? You can throw all of that out the window. This is just, Stephanie is she's just a leader, and she was born that way and she was raised that way. And what I really appreciate about Stephanie, the approach that you take is you are Street Fighter immediately comes to mind. Your own spreadsheets, getting out there and doing things, reading the history, right? Consulting with your parents, putting together the company boxes, things like that. That is such an important, that ground level understanding is such an important part of leadership. And I think also that you're a conscious student and learner. You've acknowledged the good and the bad and the ugly of the past, and you consciously drink that in. I think you use the term mentored or something like that, but really mentorship is only put out there for you to absorb. You have to actively consume it, and clearly you're an active consumer of that kind of knowledge. You're very aware of what you've learned from the past. We've talked to so many leaders that are so powerful because of that. And I think that's, you've also said people don't remember what they say, they remember how you make them feel. I feel great about the future of Stuckeys. And that, in the end, is what leadership is all about. So,
Yeah. Well,
I
thank
mean,
you.
what else can you say, right?
We could say a lot more from this conversation here, but unfortunately, and I agree with everything you just shared, also bold, forward-looking leadership, innovative leadership. That's what it's about. And Stephanie, we're looking forward to tracking you on this next chapter. But great, well put, Greg. I love what you shared there as we start to wind down here. Again, we've been talking with Stephanie Stuckey, CEO at Stuckeys Corporation. Keep them on your radar. They're going to be undeniable, undoubtedly. Yeah. So on behalf of our entire team here, hey, if you enjoy conversations like this, check them out. Check out a lot more of them at supplychainnow.com. You know, we're going to wrap up this episode, Greg, like we do every episode. We challenge our audience just as like we challenge our team. Do good, give forward, and be the change that's needed. Be like Stephanie Stuckey, undoubtedly. And on that note, we'll see you next time here on Supply Chain Now. Thanks, everybody.